Littlefoot. In the late 1990s, archaeologists found a nearly complete skeleton of the elusive Australopithecus, which they then named Littlefoot. Do you think they knew that Littlefoot was the name of the main character in the Land Before Time movies? Or do you think that it was just a coincidence that they named a prehistoric discovery the same thing? Regardless, after being found in a cave system in South Africa, the discovery was a coup, considering most fossils of the prehistoric relatives of humans are usually partial skulls, jawbones, teeth, or fragments of limb bones. So how did this specimen survive intact for so long? Excavating the skeleton from the underground cave chamber, archaeologists had to remove it from calcified deposits, the first time an Australopithecus was found this way. As researchers tried to find out the age of the remains, they made the mistake of dating the calcified casings, which was the fluid that formed and hardened around the bones, giving them a dating that was much younger than the bones. It took a team of French specialists to determine that the voids were filled after an ancient collapse, dating Littlefoot to around 3 million years old. Cleaning and studying the bones, researchers were able to pinpoint the age of the skull, arms, legs, pelvis, and other bones located in the cave. Since 1936, large numbers of Australopithecus fossils have been found in South Africa, but this one belongs to Prometheus australopithecus, an ancestor of a group of early primates that lived alongside early ancestors of humans for about 1 million years. Standing about 4 feet 2 inches, Littlefoot was an adult female that took 20 years to excavate because the fossil had to be dug out by hand instead of blasting the rock, which would have damaged it. Still, it is a very important find in archaeology circles, one that was worth the wait. Every little individual discovery helps. Hegra. During the 1st century BC, an ancient group called the Nabateans established a bustling international trade hub in what is now northwestern Saudi Arabia. Known as Hegra or Madinah Saleh, the city was built at the foot of a basaltic plateau in the Hijaz Mountains. The builders took advantage of the landscape, carving intricate structures out of massive boulders. With elements of Greek, Roman, and other styles of architecture, the buildings resemble those of Petra, the Nabatean kingdom's capital, and its only city that was larger than Hegra. Before they came to dominate the incense and spice trades throughout much of the Middle East and the Mediterranean, the Nabateans were desert-dwelling Bedouin nomads. By the 4th century BC, they had become exorbitantly wealthy through their trading activities. They subsequently established Petra and Hegra as their designated commercial headquarters, using their sophisticated knowledge of the landscape to develop a water system that enabled them to survive in the harsh, unforgiving climate. Much of Hegra's history was lost after the Romans annexed the Nabatean kingdom in 106 AD. Aside from its elegant and grand houses of worship, monumental tombs, and other structures, the mysterious civilization left little behind for modern experts to learn from. Most of what we know about the Nabateans comes from Greek, Roman, and Egyptian documents. Cryptic inscriptions found on some of Hegra's tombs include intimidating warnings that trespassers will be cursed. Several high-ranking Nabatean officers and their families were laid to rest in the city, but the stories and history behind many of the tombs are still unknown, and for some reason, several of these buildings were abandoned when they were only partially finished. Mystery liquid. Between 1783 and 1861, over 1,500 people were laid to rest at the Trinity burial site in the English port city of Hull in East Yorkshire. Many were buried with grave goods, including coins, jewelry, and other keepsakes and symbolic items. But archaeologists were thrown for a loop earlier this year when they found a sealed glass bottle full of liquid between the legs of a body. Labeled Hull Infirmary, the blue bottle contained a mysterious brown liquid. It appeared as though someone had placed it in the grave deliberately, and it was unlike anything else the team had dug up during a large-scale excavation of the site. The Hull Infirmary was a hospital that was established in 1872, the year before the cemetery opened, and the burial belonged to a woman who died in her 60s. She suffered from the degenerative bone diseases, rickets, and osteoporosis. Tests revealed that the liquid contained sodium, potassium, and phosphorus, but no pharmaceutical substances. While awaiting more comprehensive results, researchers tentatively concluded that the bottle is probably filled with urine, but they don't know why. They also think the liquid could be some type of tonic beverage. These drinks were popular during the 19th century as a treatment for various medical ailments. While excavations are due to end soon, the ensuing study of the artifacts and human remains is expected to take several years. Iron Age murder victim. It's not strange for construction workers to unearth historical finds while digging to build new roads or buildings, but a group working just outside London, England found something peculiar. They uncovered the skeleton of a man face down in a ditch with his hands bound in front of him. Even though the bindings used to restrain him had long since rotted away, his hands remained trapped under his pelvis. Even more fascinating is the fact that the body wasn't in a grave or coffin, but archaeologists examining the body did find pottery fragments that might help them determine when the unfortunate man lived. Discovered about 15 miles northwest of London, the body was found on a farm that was near an ancient road known as the Icknield Way, and was used as a travel route since prehistoric times. It isn't the only historical discovery made in the area. Many ancient sites are nearby, including relics from nearly 4,000 years of human occupation stretching from the Neolithic to the medieval periods. Remnants of pens for animals and food pits were also found where the bound man was located, but another grave which was found nearby had a lead-lined coffin which was more ornate than the suspected murder victim. Two very different burials in one location after a unique glimpse into the Bronze Age and how ancient people lived and died in England. Bagan. Bagan was a beautiful ancient city founded in Myanmar's Mandalay region during the 2nd century. It served as the capital of a Burmese dynasty called the Pagan Kingdom, which unified the regions that comprise modern-day Myanmar. As the kingdom's capital, Bagan functioned as a major political, economic, and cultural center that focused on both secular and religious studies. It had anywhere between 50,000 and 200,000 residents at its peak. Religion dominated the culture during the city's heyday, which lasted from the 11th to the 13th century. During that time, the surrounding Bagan plains had as many as 10,000 Buddhist temples, pagodas, and monasteries. But the people at Bagan were unusually tolerant and fluid for the time when it came to other belief systems, including Hinduism and animism. The bustling urban center collapsed in 1287 amid repeated Mongol attacks. Invading forces did very little physical damage to Bagan, but they reduced its population to the size of a small town. Following the empire's fall, the Minsang Kingdom became Burma's ruling power. Bagan's temples continued to serve as pilgrimage destinations for some time, but the structures were neglected and eventually fell into disrepair. Many of the temples were destroyed beyond repair when a major earthquake struck in 1975. During the 1990s, the Myanmar government attempted to restore some of these buildings, but its efforts were met with widespread criticism from experts who accused the restorers of failing to consider the original architectural styles. Then, in 2016, another earthquake struck, significantly damaging around 400 temples. Today, there are 2,200 remaining structures at Bagan, which is a popular tourist destination and one of Burma's only 2 designated UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Wari Mummy. Before the Inca civilization rose to power, an ancient civilization known as the Wari culture flourished in what is now Peru. From around 500 to 1000 AD, they lived throughout the country's highlands and along the coast. The society began to decline around 800 AD, and within 200 years, only a small number of its descendants remained. Buildings were shuttered and construction came to a halt as violence and looting rose. While the exact circumstances of the Wari civilization's collapse are unknown, evidence suggests that increasing encounters with rival groups destabilized the state structure, leading to its downfall. In 2008, archaeologists working at a site near Lima called Wakapuklana discovered the mummy of a Wari woman, along with the remains of 2 adults and a child. The mummy was the first intact burial to be found at Wakapuklana, and is believed to date back to around 700 AD. As excavations continued, around 30 well-preserved adult mummies were also unearthed there. The mummies are decorated with shockingly large eyes and are kind of creepy at first glance. Speaking with Reuters, a worker named Miguel Angel described the sight as startling and unexpected. The Wari people often sacrificed small children and buried them with adults, but their funerary customs and their culture in general are largely a mystery. The mummies found at Wakapuklana gave scientists a rare opportunity to learn more about Wari traditions, although their knowledge admittedly remains limited. Ancient mummy's voice. You might be terrified of ancient curses, but for scientists, anytime a mummy is found from ancient Egypt is a cause for celebration. Researchers and Egyptologists agree they're a fascinating look into how life and death were celebrated by the people who lived along the Nile. But is there a better way to hear about life in ancient times? According to researchers who decided to recreate the vocal tract of a 3,000-year-old mummy, there may be. It might sound like the beginning of a bad horror movie, but using medical scanners, 3D printing, and an electronic larynx, researchers were able to recreate how the ancient mummy would have sounded. When scientists tested their creation, they were able to get a single sound from the Egyptian priest Nasiamen, whose mummified body was used for the experiment. Sounding somewhere between the vowels in bed and bad, the tone isn't exactly how the priest would have sounded in real life, given the fact that his tongue has lost most of its bulk over the 3,000 years since he was mummified. Hoping to continue their work to recreate the mummy's voice for future experiences, where the public might be able to hear the priest's voice at places like Karnak, archaeologists will continue to work on creating entire words and sentences direct from the mummy's mouth. Creepy, isn't it? Kemuna. During the 15th century BC, a kingdom called the Mitanni Empire ruled over an area that encompassed parts of modern-day Turkey, Syria, and Iraq. When it fell to the Assyrians sometime during the 14th or 13th century BC, the short-lived dynasty's culture was destroyed by its conquerors, leaving behind very little in the way of historical records and archaeological evidence. Consequently, the Mitanni people's origins, ethnicity, and lifestyle are a mystery. Even their capital, Taidu, has never been found. In 2019, a drought caused the waters of the Mosul Dam Reservoir in northern Iraq to recede, exposing the ruins of a Mitanni city called Kemuna. Archaeologists discovered the site in 2010, but this was the first time water levels were low enough for them to actually explore the area. They identified a palace with 20-foot-high walls and chambers that once housed vivid paintings. Located to the south of the city, it overlooked the Tigris River from 65 feet away. The grand structure is one of just 4 Mitanni palaces ever discovered. Unlike the other 3 which sat on the outskirts of the empire, it was located at the center of Mitanni territory. The team also found 10 clay tablets inscribed with Mitanni cuneiform. It's one of the earliest known forms of writing. A translation of one tablet suggests that Kemune was originally called Zakiku. It wasn't long before the site was once again submerged, leaving the archaeologists with no choice but to wait until it's once again exposed to return. In a CNN interview at the time, excavation leader Ivanopoulou said that the team hoped to learn more about the mysterious civilization from the artifacts they collected. Vampire child burial. In 2018, archaeologists working in an ancient cemetery in Lugnano, Italy discovered the burial of a child with a rock jammed into his or her mouth. It's believed that the youth, dubbed the Vampire of Lugnano, may have died from malaria. The people who laid them to rest may have inserted the rock into their mouth for good measure, to prevent them from rising from the grave, spreading disease to others, or sucking the blood of innocent people. Describing the discovery as eerie and weird, excavation overseer and anthropologist David Soren explained that it was one of the more unusual burials that have been unearthed since he began leading the project in 1987. In fact, until the discovery of the so-called Vampire of Lugnano, researchers thought the cemetery was reserved exclusively for babies and toddlers. Bioarchaeologist Jordan Wilson told Live Science that the graveyard was only partially excavated and that the team was unsure whether they'd find more graves belonging to older children. Belgian Bone Cathedral. A gruesome secret was lying beneath the foundation of a Belgian cathedral, and when experts uncovered the find, they were understandably shaken. A 500-year-old partition was found in the city of Ghent, but this was no ordinary wall. It was made from human bones. Built in the 17th century, the Gothic Cathedral of St. Bavo was built on the site of the former chapel of St. John the Baptist, originally constructed in 942. So how did the bones get there, and why were they stacked to create a wall? Experts believe that when the new cathedral was being built, the bones in the original cemetery had to be cleared for construction. Since the faithful believed in the resurrection of the body, the bones were considered the most important part, so rather than throw them away, it seems they were moved and used as building materials. The theory also started to hold more weight when researchers dated the bones to be about 200 years old when they were used to construct the wall. Made up of mostly adult thigh and shin bones, the wall also had fragments from shattered skulls intersped throughout. The structure, intentionally built with human bones, stunned archaeologists, who say human remains are normally stored in loose dirt pits filled with bones or ossuaries, which are stone buildings built next to the walls of city graveyards to store skeletal remains. 9 walls were uncovered during the excavation, and even though they seem similar to the catacombs in Paris, where skeletal remains are gathered and preserved in underground crypts, the folks in charge of St. Bavo's Cathedral have no plans to create a similar tourist attraction. Medieval Castle. For decades, the owners of Salton Hall, an ancient manor in Shropshire, England, wondered why there was a strange mound in their backyard. Knowing the property's history of human occupation goes back thousands of years, Tim Ashton and his family suspected that it might contain valuable clues about the manor's past. Archaeologists finally excavated the mound this year and found the remains of what appears to be a medieval castle. They believe it dates back to the 13th century and have so far uncovered a sandstone wall and wet timber that may have once been part of a moat bridge. In addition to the structures, the team found a medieval pilgrim's badge shaped like a small cross, which may have featured a figure of Jesus Christ at some point. Christians wore these souvenirs as they traveled to Catholic holy places. A volunteer also found a 13th century vessel called an ampulla, which pilgrims used for carrying holy water and oil. Salton Hall was built during the 17th century, but wealthy members of society lived at the site as early as 1086 AD. Neolithic flints dating back roughly 5,500 years have also been found there, suggesting that the property's human history goes back much further. Have you ever found anything cool buried on your property? Let me know in the comments below, and if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. Mass death of animals. 9 million years ago, during the late Miocene epoch, dozens of giraffes, rhinos, horses, and saber-toothed cats traveled to watering holes in what is now Spain, desperately seeking relief amid severe drought. They died from starvation, dehydration, and getting stuck in the mud, and were quickly buried when rain returned to the region, leaving their bodies undisturbed by scavengers and the elements. Miners discovered one of the ancient bone-filled watering holes in 2007, and archaeologists have since identified 9 sites outside Madrid. In a recent study, researchers examined a collection of 9,000 bones found at a watering hole called Batallones 10. They counted dozens of species, including at least 15 large mammals such as extinct mastodons, saber-toothed cats, badgers, rhinos, cattle, horses, and musk deer, according to Live Science. The team also identified a new giraffe relative, the Cenitherium rex. It more closely resembles a giant moose than a modern giraffe, standing at roughly 9 feet tall and weighing around 2.2 tons. Experts identified the site as a watering hole based on the presence of amphibians and tortoises. They found that the animals died in 3 distinct episodes of drought. During those times, wildlife flocked to the area and refused to stray far from it. Consequently, the creatures ate all the vegetation, unwilling to leave the dwindling watering hole in search of food. They began to suffer from starvation and dehydration. As the water supply shrank, animals ventured into the mud to drink, got stuck, and died. Each period of mass death lasted weeks or months until the rain came and buried the remains in sediment. Sadly, it appears as though more tragic discoveries are to come. Speaking with Live Science, study leader David Martin Perea explained that the next step is for the team to dig deeper and further examine the deaths that occurred at the site. Peruvian zoo burials. An ancient cemetery that had been used in the final stage of a bloody occupation of Lima, Peru 1,300 years ago is being unearthed and reveals a multitude of new discoveries. A series of excavations at a pre-Hispanic cemetery found in 2018 have revealed new human burials of 2 adults and 1 child. Located in a squat position with their legs bent, the adults were found next to a pottery vessel. Another burial of a person laying on their side with their head turned to the ground suggests they may have been an offering to the gods. Interestingly, the bodies were found at the Parque de las Leyendas Zoo, which is home to over 200 animals and also houses a botanical garden. But the main attraction to archaeologists is the site of the ancient city of Maranga, which is where the bodies were found. When the city was at its peak, it was home to huge monuments, temples, and palaces over a 4 million square meter site, one of Peru's largest. Because it was such a large city, it's no surprise that bodies have been unearthed there. But another find in 2018 of around 140 children between ages 5 and 14 was a shocker. All of the skeletons had lesions on their breastbones, which, along with dislocated rib cages, leads researchers to believe they were involved in some sort of sacrificial removal of their hearts. Finds like this might seem shocking, but they provide insight to archaeologists about how these ancient cultures lived, what they ate, and any diseases they may have suffered from. They also provide insight into funerary and ritualistic practices that might seem strange in modern times, but were important to these ancient cultures. Bahangar Fort. In 1573, a ruler named Raja Bhagwan Singh built a sprawling fort for his son, Madho Singh, in what is now the state of Rajasthan in northern India. Known as the Bhangar Fort, the site was a flourishing town with as many as 10,000 residents during its heyday. It was filled with grand temples, marketplaces, and stunning mansions or havelis. Several legends attempt to explain why Bhangar Fort was ultimately abandoned. One story claims that a Hindu ascetic named Baba Balak Nath insisted on having the settlement's tallest home and assured that the town would be destroyed if someone went against his wishes. When the fort was built, it cast a shadow on his dwelling, and he retaliated by cursing the structure. Another tale tells of a black magic magician who tried to woo a beautiful Bhangar princess with a special love potion. She rejected him and threw the concoction at a boulder, triggering the giant rock to roll over the magician and crush him. That is a little harsh. As he lay dying, he cursed the fort, promising that it would become unlivable. Today, Bhangar Fort is considered one of India's most haunted sites. Several people have died in accidents there, prompting the Archaeological Survey of India to ban overnight visitors. This was supposedly done for safety reasons, but some people believe that the authorities are trying to keep people out when spiritual activity is at its highest. Witches' carvings. The Church of St. Mary in Stoke Mandeville, England was built around 1070 AD. It initially served as a private chapel but was expanded for public use sometime before 1340. This communal house of worship remained in use until a new church replaced it in 1866, and it was demolished during the 1960s. While excavating the ruins of the abandoned medieval structure ahead of a high-speed rail project, archaeologists found strange carvings known as witches' marks. The stone etchings consisted of central drilled holes with spokes radiating outward, resembling a wheel. Experts believe the design may have been meant to entrap evil spirits. The depictions could also represent basic sundials or scratch dials, which were typically located near a church's southern door. These timekeeping mechanisms were used for signaling morning, midday, and evening prayer times. Another carving believed to be a witch's mark was used for determining the time of the next church service. Researchers are currently working to resolve unanswered questions about the site, including if there is another church beneath St. Mary's. Witches' marks dating from the early medieval period in the 19th century have been found near the entrances of churches, barns, houses, caves, and other structures throughout England. At the time, the belief in witchcraft was widespread. People used magical symbols and ritual objects in their daily lives as a way to protect themselves from harm. The images vary. In addition to spoked wheels, they're known to feature six-petaled flowers known as daisy wheels, overlapping V's, and other symbols meant for warding off malicious spirits. Sonbelek slab. Imagine finding a strange carved piece of stone in your backyard from almost 4,000 years ago. That happened recently when a long-lost stone slab originally found in a French parish ended up being a very important relic from the Bronze Age. It was first discovered around 1900 but was left in a dusty corner of a museum for a century before scientists analyzed it and realized what it was. Dating to between 2150 and 1600 BCE, the slab was partly broken with its upper part missing, but along its surface, distinct carvings are visible. Engraved with lines and intricate motifs, it is not only believed to be a cartographic representation of a territory in Europe, it is also believed to be the oldest map of Europe ever found. Repeated motifs and lines represent the valley of the River Odette, with various lines depicting the river network. Made to represent an area that measures over 20 miles by 13 miles, the slab was unearthed in western Brittany from burial mounds used in ancient rites at the end of the early Bronze Age. Before the slab was removed, it measured almost 13 feet long and formed the wall of a coffin-like box with human remains. No ordinary slab, it was purposely designed to be three-dimensional with a valley and lines to depict three different river springs that have clearly been around for thousands of years since the dawn of civilization. Experts believe the map may have once been used by a Bronze Age prince or king to mark his ownership over a particular area, and the fact that it was buried could have marked the end of their reign or possibly a rejection by the masses he ruled over. Either way, this stone slab, forgotten for decades, was luckily rediscovered, so its importance could be celebrated. Merv. The ancient city of Merv was founded during the 6th century BC by the Persian Achaemenid Empire in the Karakum Desert of what is now southern Turkmenistan. Its advantageous location along the Silk Road trade route made it a highly sought-after prize for the Greeks, Arabs, and Turks, who all controlled the city at various points throughout its history. Merv peaked under the rule of the Seljuk Turks. By the 13th century, it was the world's biggest city, with a population of over 500,000 residents, and it continued to grow. The walled metropolis functioned as an oasis and an administrative and commercial center with sophisticated features including canals, gardens, reservoirs, bridges, greenery, streets, mosques, libraries, bathhouses, schools, markets, and more. It was also a cultural and educational center that attracted poets, musicians, astronomers, physicians, physicists, mathematicians, and other intellectuals. In 1221, Genghis Khan's son, Tului Khan, led a Mongol army into the city. The invaders laid siege to Merv, slaughtering somewhere between 700,000 and 1,000,000 people, nearly the entire population. Then, they set fire to the metropolis. Merv was destroyed. Several rulers attempted to rebuild it, but they never managed to restore the once bustling urban center to its former glory. Looking at the decaying ruins of Merv today, it's hard to imagine it as a flourishing city. Prehistoric pregnant burial. Around 4,000 years ago, in what is now Hungary, a woman died while pregnant with twins. She and her unborn babies were cremated and buried in a Bronze Age urn cemetery alongside hundreds of other graves. Researchers recently examined the contents of the woman's burial as part of a larger effort to learn more about the little understood Vatya culture that she was a part of. The grave contained noticeably lavish goods, including a golden hairpiece, a bronze neck ring, and 2 bone pins. The team also found the bones of 2 fetuses who perished when the woman died around 30 weeks into her pregnancy. She was in her late 20s to early 30s when she passed away. Based on her luxurious grave goods, she was a highly respected member of her community. It was also clear that every effort was taken to ensure that every detectable fragment of the woman and her children's cremated remains were placed into the urn, unlike other burials in the cemetery, which were far less complete. An analysis of her teeth and bones revealed that she likely migrated to the area as a child from the region encompassing modern-day Czech Republic. Her dignified burial suggests that she married an elite member of the Vatya community, only to have her life tragically cut short. The woman's cause of death is uncertain, but childbirth complications are a safe guess. The Lost Golden City of Luxor. You might think that Akhenaten had an easy life ruling ancient Egypt, but something must have appeared in Thebes for him to not only abandon the city, but to ditch his name and his religion too. 3,400 years ago, the pharaoh left everything behind in the capital of what is now modern-day Luxor, only to set up shop in a new city bearing his name, Akhenaten. There, he ruled alongside his wife Nefertiti, but it didn't last for long. After he died, his son took over rule and turned his back on his father's legacy. Evidence of this strange turn of events was found at a newly discovered royal metropolis, the lost Golden City of Luxor. Inherited from his father Amenhotep III, the city was discovered in 2020, a remarkably preserved, sprawling site that continues to stun researchers. But the site, which was a hub of wealth, power, and luxury, was later abandoned by Akhenaten when he turned his back on all the traditional Egyptian gods, choosing to only worship the sun god Aten. He even went so far to change his name from Amenhotep IV to his new moniker, which means devoted to Aten. Researchers have so far discovered 2 mortuary temples. Between the two, archaeologists expected to find funerary items for Tutankhamun, but instead they uncovered zigzagging mud brick walls with ancient artifacts emblazoned with the royal seal of Amenhotep III. Decorative and ritual objects like scarab beetles and amulets certainly have the city living up to its name, because these finds are definitely worth their weight in gold to archaeologists who are starting to see the vibrant life of these ancient families who once ruled the sands of Egypt. Thulamela. The ancient city of Thulamela thrived between the 13th and 17th century in what is now Kruger National Park in South Africa. Today, the 22-acre site consists of several stone enclosures that sit on a hill. Thulamela's residents lived in what anthropologist Lynn Meskel described as a stratified society. Meskel believes that around 1,000 elites occupied the top of the hill, while around 2,000 members of other classes lived on the lower levels, although she admits that these numbers are purely speculative. Modern researchers named the city Thulamela. Nobody knows what its inhabitants actually called it. A park ranger rediscovered the settlement in 1983, and it was finally investigated during the 1990s after South Africa's racially divisive apartheid system ended. Porcelain, glass beads, and other objects found during excavations were traced to as far away as China and elsewhere, reflecting Thulamella's far-reaching ties with civilizations in North Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. Archaeologists also found the burials of a seemingly royal couple that contained royal goods such as gold necklaces, bangles, beads, and other jewelry. In addition to working with gold, Thulamella's residents also crafted bronze, iron, and copper objects. Some of their creations resemble items found at other archaeological sites, including Mapungubwe in modern-day northern South Africa and Great Zimbabwe in what is now the country of Zimbabwe. The prosperous city was abandoned during the 17th century for unknown reasons. According to the study, evidence shows that Thulamella began drying out in the years leading to its desertion. It's likely that various factors contributed to the settlement's downfall, including civil war, an increased Portuguese colonial presence, but for now, experts admittedly do not have the full picture of exactly what happened to this once thriving metropolis. Skull Tower of Niš. After defeating Serbian rebels in 1809, victorious Turks built a tower with the decapitated skulls of 952 enemy soldiers. Known as the Cele Kula or the Skull Tower of Niš, the macabre structure is located in modern-day Serbia. It was commissioned by Turkish General Hershi Pasha as a warning to anyone else who might be tempted to go against his word. Measuring 15 feet tall and 13 feet wide, the Skull Tower originally consisted of 56 rows of 17 skulls each. It was built during a widespread rebellion against the Ottoman Empire known as the Serbian Revolution, which lasted from 1804 to 1817. In what became known as the First Serbian Uprising in 1809, the vastly outnumbered Serbs realized their options for fighting against the Turks were limited. With 36,000 enemy troops at their doorstep, it became clear that their only realistic choices were to surrender or flee. But Commander Stevan Sindelic refused to go down without a fight, in a last-ditch effort to eliminate as many Turks as possible, and as a final show of disrespect towards Pasha, he walked into a fully stocked gunpowder room and shot a gunpowder keg. The gesture outraged Pasha, who ordered his men to mutilate the Serbian fighters' corpses. The dead rebels were beheaded and their skulls were used to build the morbid monument. The tower was topped with Sindelic's skull. Meanwhile, their skins were stuffed with straw and shipped to Istanbul as proof of Pasha's victory. The Serbs finally drove the Ottomans out in 1878, and in 1892, the Serbian government built a chapel around the tower. Many families retrieved the skulls of their fallen loved ones. Today, only 59 skulls remain at the site, which attracts some 30,000 visitors every year. Lost Viking ships. Known as an unstoppable force of history, the Vikings were known for not only trading on 4 continents, but their savage raids on nations they saw as competition. The discovery of 2 ships near Estonia, filled with slain warriors, offer a glimpse to their reign. Dozens of men were found on the 2 ships, with 7 lying haphazardly in the smaller boat. 33 additional men were found in the larger vessel, buried in a neat pile with their weapons and animals stacked with them. Archaeologists think the men died in a battle around 700 or 750, which is actually almost a century before the Viking Age officially began. To find the boat from a time when long-distance voyages were uncommon was a unique discovery, but it almost didn't happen. Workers digging trenches for electrical cables on the island of Salme found human bones, and after calling in local authorities, a spearhead and carved bone gaming piece were also found. Digging deeper to get a better picture of what they discovered, archaeologists were shocked to see the trace of a boat's hull. Even though most of the timber had rotted away, they uncovered 275 iron rivets, which would have held the boat together and helped them trace the outlines of the 38-foot-long boat. Among the bones, which belonged to men aged 18 to 45, a number of knives, whetstones, and a bone comb were also found with the slain crew. Remarkably, a second similar boat was found 2 years later just 100 feet away from the first. With the boat found at the Salmis site, it pushed the first evidence of sailing back a century or more. The second boat, stretching 55 feet long and 10 feet wide, is believed to be the oldest sailing vessel ever found in the Baltic Sea. 2 summers of excavation at the second site uncovered 33 bodies, stacked 4 deep. The similarities in the boats and their contents lead experts to believe they were buried at the same time and possibly at the same event. Given the fact that they were filled with bodies, one can only guess it was a ceremonial tribute to the fallen men. The Bible mentions an ancient Sumerian city-state called Ur. It's the place that Abraham left behind when he relocated to Canaan at God's instruction. While many people doubt the Bible's claims, understandably so, Ur was actually a real place. In fact, it became a prosperous trade hub even before it was mentioned in scripture. Founded around 3800 BC or perhaps even earlier in what is now Iraq, this powerful Persian Gulf port city had as many as 80,000 residents at its peak. Ur was continuously inhabited until around 450 BC, when climate change and the overuse of land prompted the population to flee northward to more fertile territory. Italian explorer Pietro della Valle rediscovered Ur in 1625. While traveling through the area, he noticed bricks and other artifacts bearing strange inscriptions. At the time, the city's ruins were buried beneath the sand. British archaeologist Sir Leonard Woolley excavated the site in 1922 and found that Ur is largely reduced to rubble. The city's most visible surviving remnant is a partially restored ziggurat that was unearthed during the 1930s. It was originally built during the 21st century BC and was rebuilt under Babylonian's last king, Nabonidus, during the 6th century BC. Time and the elements have transformed the coastline. What's left of Ur sits much further inland than it did during its heyday, when it was a coastal city located near the mouth of the Euphrates River. The ruins are helping archaeologists learn more about the culture that built and lived in Ur, but their knowledge is limited by what little is available at the site, and there are still many mysteries surrounding the ancient city. Ancient child's burial. While searching for World War II artifacts recently in Keblos village in Pamu County, Estonia, a team of archaeologists unexpectedly found an ancient grave containing the remains of a young child. The discovery was made in an agricultural field where an array of other artifacts have been unearthed, including knives, spearheads, and bracelets. Unlike most late antiquity burials in the region, the grave wasn't covered with rocks, giving no clues to its presence until it was encountered by accident. Found just 15 inches underground, the burial consisted of the child's bones and jewelry, suggesting that the individual was a girl. Interestingly, the grave goods contained at least one adult-sized ring. Speaking with ERR News, archaeologist and excavation leader Matti Mandel explained that the next step is to examine the bones to determine how old the person was when they died. The team is also trying to identify the child. Remains found at the Keblos cemetery have been dated between the 10th and 13th centuries, but many of the graves were ruined due to farming, complicating the ability to properly understand their context. Chalcatzingo. Around 1500 BC, an ancient settlement called Chalcatzingo sprang up in Mexico's Central Highlands. They developed a complex culture around 900 BC, around the same time that one of Mesoamerica's oldest civilizations, the Olmecs, established a presence in the region. Elements of the architecture and artistic style found at Chalcatzingo indicate that its inhabitants were Olmec settlers or had close ties to the Olmecs. Images of large-toothed wildcats at the site suggest that the city's residents shared in the Olmec worship of the jaguar. The artwork includes depictions of big cats with beaks and other unnatural features, as well as felines engaging in violent acts. One carving shows a ferocious jaguar disemboweling a human. The settlement was situated along intersecting trade routes that connected the Olmecs with Mesoamerican societies throughout Mexico. At its peak, Chalcatzingo was home to somewhere between 500 and 1,000 residents who grew staple crops like corn. They nourished their fields with water from a nearby mountain stream. Chalcatzingo experienced an abrupt decline around 500 BC, around the same time that the Olmec civilization collapsed. Researchers believe that environmental factors are responsible for the Olmec's fall outside Chalcatzingo. While these events did not directly affect the city, its population likely suffered a cultural decline and economic hardship resulting from decreased trade and contact with other groups. The Olmec's origins are unknown, and nobody knows how widespread the civilization really was. And while the Aztecs called them the Olmecs, we don't know for sure what they called themselves. Experts know very little about their religion beyond their apparent jaguar worship and evidence indicating that they had some sort of organized belief system and priesthood. Until or unless more discoveries are made, our understanding of this early Mesoamerican society will remain incomplete. Nazi bunker. Let's face it, secret bunkers are creepy by nature, no matter what they look like or how nice they are on the inside. but they're even more disturbing when they're associated with a dark chapter in history. While building an underground parking lot in July of this year, construction workers in the Polish city of Lublin discovered a World War II-era Nazi bunker that was built during German occupation. Construction plans were put on hold, and archaeologists were called in to investigate. Found 23 feet underground, the wooden structure consists of a staircase that leads to 3 separate corridors. The team unearthed mineral water bottles made in Germany and the Czech Republic, both German and Red Army ammunition that had been fired, suggesting that a battle took place inside the bunker. Excavations are ongoing, and archaeologists have no idea what other artifacts they might find. They are checking to see if there are any unexploded bombs before they continue investigating. The Soviets invaded Poland just 2 weeks after the Nazis attacked and occupied the country's eastern region until the summer of 1941, when the German army drove them out during Operation Barbarossa. The Nazis controlled the area until the summer of 1944, when the Red Army took it back over. Tooth tumors. While excavating a Gothic cemetery in Lisbon, Portugal in 2010 to 2011, archaeologists discovered something bizarre: a calcified mass covered with teeth, situated near the pelvis of a 45-year-old woman's skeletal remains. At first, the team did not know what the object was. They initially speculated that it was a fetus or the product of an ectopic pregnancy. Eventually, they determined that it was a type of ovarian cyst called a teratoma. Teratomas occur when germ cells multiply abnormally, forming hair, teeth, bones, and other mature tissues. In many cases, they are benign or harmless, but they can also become large, painful, and cancerous. Measuring 1.7 inches at its widest point, the mass contained 5 malformed teeth, according to a study on the tumor. The afflicted woman died sometime between the 15th century and 1755, when an earthquake destroyed the cemetery and the nearby church and convent of Carmo. It is unknown whether the cyst contributed to her death, but her skeleton seemed unaffected by it. Surprisingly, these tumors have been discovered at other archaeological sites as well. In 2013, a 1600-year-old teratoma was found with a woman's remains at a Roman necropolis in Spain. It's also unknown whether the mass was benign or if it played a role in the woman's death. Teratomas are actually quite common in today's world, comprising roughly 20% of all ovarian tumors. But researchers are still learning about their history, and this off-putting but important discovery is helping them do so. Thanks for watching. Which one of these discoveries was the creepiest to you? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you next time. Bye!